Next up, we have our first panel. We've got two industry players, Pioneer and KODA Resources, sharing their views on deploying a methane management program in the field. This panel will be moderated by Sean O'Donnell, a managing director at Quantum. Sean and his team have contributed a lot to making this particular event a reality, and I'm very grateful to Sean and his team. So thank you very much for joining us. I'll hand it over to you now, Sean, to introduce our panelists and kick the conversation off.
Great. Thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. I am more than pleased to introduce a panel with two gentlemen that oversee methane management programs for two kind of industry-leading teams. To pivot back to Will's question as to why are we here, for this panel, why these gentlemen are here and what we're hoping to accomplish. We really hope the next 40 to 45 minutes will be helpful to our audience, for companies who are either looking to start a methane management program or to continue to involve a pilot or to extend the aperture on a program that, you may have a few years already under your belt with. And the concept is really with the sharing of thoughts and learnings and best practices around program design, technology and innovation and O&M best practices. So with that in mind, let me introduce our panelists. Joining us this morning from Pioneer Natural Resources is Sri Sridharan. Sri is Pioneer's Sustainable Development Advisor, who oversees all facets of research, technology deployment, innovation, operations and maintenance, facilities design, around specifically methane management. And he oversees a program that has been in operation for, I think, now going into its 10th year. So excited to hear about, a program manager with so much kind of time and scope underway at Pioneer. We're also pleased to welcome Karl Biermann from KODA Resources, quantum portfolio company. Karl wears a few hats at KODA as both a senior production manager in the Uinta Basin as well as the environmental manager for the team in the Uinta. Karl oversees a methane management program that was initiated about 4 or 5 years ago that we'll look forward to taking you through here in the next couple of minutes. So with that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Sri from Pioneer.
Thank you, Sean. Great opportunity to talk here. Again, I work in the Pioneer Natural Resource Sustainable Development Team. Sustainable Development Team, it's a forward-looking area of Pioneer where we work very closer to our operations team and understand the challenges and also my main focus falls into 3 categories, is trying to understand methane research, what's happening around methane, different topics that goes around in terms of different studies and research that goes around. The other category I spend my time on is on tracking emerging technologies associated with methane detection and methane mitigation. The other category that I work very closely with, that I enjoy, is working with our field teams and our different cross-functional teams, is to incorporate technologies that's aligned with Pioneer's working principles and how that's incorporated well. With that said, I'm going to give a brief overview of Pioneer, where we started, and Pioneer's journey in the process. First off, Pioneer's a company with a great culture, and our management team is very engaged with the HSE topic. And we have several subcommittees led by senior management, so they're very engaged in understanding our HSE related issues. Being one of the large operators in the Permian, Pioneer had several thoughtful initiatives that minimizes its environmental footprint. And very specifically for methane, we have started our timeline as early as 2012, 2013. We have been working with different projects, be part of research institutions and academic studies. With that said, kind of three ways that still how it fits in the overall program as what Pioneer does is follows my pattern of categories that I fit in, or I do. As a company, we participate in several methane related studies, because the first thing is you want to understand what problem you're solving. If you don't understand the problem, it's hard to know, hard to mitigate emissions. So early on in 2012, we were part of studies where we worked towards understanding what emissions are seeing, what is our operational footprint in terms of methane emissions look like. We worked through that. We're continuing to be part of several studies. Pioneer is also one among the founding members of Collaboratory for Methane Science, which was founded in 2018, which essentially the core objective is to pursue or further methane science. There's also a first project that we have done, I'm proud to talk about it, is the MEET model, Methane Emissions Evaluation Tool. It helps any operator in any basin to understand their emissions over time and space, that allows to understand what their emissions are with their operational inputs. It's complete, and there will be a lot of papers published on that, so that's a very good accomplished part of CAMS. So that's useful for any operators, open source, so that'll be very an interesting tool for everyone to understand their footprint. The other part is we're also a founding participant in the API Environmental Partnership, where there are certain requirements you do voluntarily, then you participate, and then you commit to doing those. So Pioneers actively engage in understanding emissions, and also with several initiatives that helps the industry overall. The next part, Pioneer journey, is also piloting or tracking and piloting technologies that we think that best fits our operational MO. So we started voluntary leak detection program as early as 2014, way ahead of the regulatory programs. We wanted to get ahead in terms of prepare ourselves for regulations, but even prior to that, we wanted to understand in terms of, while we understand from outside the studies, we want to understand what we are actually there. And that's one of the key things that it helped us drive the voluntary program, and also helped us prepare for the KODA regulations, which came in 2016. As part of the implementation, we went through several facility design incorporations. Where applicable, we installed vapor recovery units, so to keep the gas in the pipeline. And we replaced our pneumatic, high bleed pneumatic controllers with low bleed. That project was early in 2014, 2015 timeframe, even before those were being talked about. We also installed instrument air kits in most of our battery facilities, where it's guided by or actuated by natural gas. So those were some quick build and wins for us as we progressed in our journey. We also have an effective flare management. We have a very coordinated effort where we bring wells online only when we are ready, when there's a pipeline capacity, something we were able to do. That's one of the things we're also proud of. The third thing Pioneer always looked at as we worked through with over 680,000 acres of operational footprint in Permian, we were like thinking conventional method of monitoring for leaks or methane management is not going to take us very long. So we decided to take an innovative approach in how we design our programs with the learnings from ground-based Eldar program. We came up with a little bit more. Working with our innovation team, we're continually work on piloting technologies that are very early in the stage, but they're ready, but early in there, help them develop, and also we develop. So that kind of gave the opportunity for both of us as a company to develop on this on the program, and also help vendors to develop their technology by providing access and data. So it's been a great journey, and we're continuing to work towards it. We're very excited to be here. Thanks, Sean.
Great, thank you, Sri. For our next panelist, I'd like to introduce Karl. Karl, if you have your slides ready to go, we'll turn it over to you right now.
Thank you, Sean. Do you see the slides on there?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. So first off, just want to thank EIG, Quantum, and EDF for hosting this, and all the attendees. The 120 plus sounds like attendees calling into this, the time that you guys are committing to this. As Will had mentioned, all of us being industry stakeholders, this is an ever increasing subject, ESG. So what we're going to present here today on KODA, us being a very small private equity company, our methane management journey. And going through these slides, a couple key things I want to focus on is what was practical, what is workable, and what is scalable. You hear methane, it can be a scary topic, especially at a smaller company. So first here, who is KODA? We're headquartered here in Denver. We're backed by Quantum Energy Partners. We focus on acquisition development in the Rockies. Currently, we have 2 assets, one in the Uinta Basin, of which I'm speaking today. We have about 150,000 net acres, about 1,200 wells in Utah. And we have a small position in the Williston Basin in North Dakota. First bullet, KODA's sustainable strategy is centered around culture. This is a big piece I think that'll apply to a lot of companies here is you have to have buy-in from the sponsorship level to the executives, to the managers, all the way down to the boots on the ground. Your operators and your day in, day out employees that are out in the field working this methane management strategy. If you don't have that alignment, you're not going to get the buy-in from the guys in the field doing it. We live where we work. So this is walking, you talk the talk, but this is also walking the walk. Where those boots on the ground, where those operators live and work, we're making it a more safe environment for them to be in. And a lot of our operators recreate where we work. They're out there hunting, fishing, and doing things in the outdoors. And a focus on safety. So our number one goal is to get all of our guys home safely every day, back to their families. And by focusing on this, it hones you in on a lot of the safety aspects. The third is looking at it from a business perspective. You need to take a business justification approach. Why are we looking at doing this? And ultimately, product burnt or lost due to lost emissions is product not sold. So I'll go through a couple real world examples that show our approach on we had to justify spending the capital to implement this program and some of the key technologies, but then also the benefits to it. So our journey in 2017, as Sri had mentioned, we took a proactive approach with some of the overhanging KODA little a requirements that were coming down. We elected to purchase a FLIR camera and do this in-house, and we went to all of our actual locations and did a field-wide OGI look on all of our equipment. In 18-19, from that initial big efforts, a lot of stuff came out of that as far as how we were designing facilities going forward with a methane emissions focus. I'll get into some examples, but a lot of what Sri had mentioned, some of the low-hanging fruit in that space is replacing a lot of your high bleed pneumatics with a low bleed, no bleed actuator. In our facility, we actually installed some flame and gas detection, or fire eyes and LELs. We utilized a dual fuel system on our drilling rig, and we also reached out to some industry experts on emissions with our reporting and calculations of being SLR, which they'll be talking to us later here today. Most recently, a couple accolades for the efforts we've been working on. In 2019, we received the Leadership in Ozone Reduction Awareness by the Tri-County Health Department in Utah. And most recently, we just received a few months ago the 2020 Environmental Excellence Award from the Utah Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining for the efforts that our team has been focused and working on. Okay, Eldar Program. I mentioned in 2017, we put a high focus on this and we invested some capital in it. So we currently have 2 members on our team. We have about 1,200 wells, as mentioned, that are certified and focus on certified to submit our KODA requirements from the Eldar inspection. So for all of our semi-annual KODA locations, which would be anything after September 18th, 2015, we do that all in-house. But we also do voluntary Eldar and field-wide spot checks. The intent is just with our current staff and the current regulations is a field-wide look. We can't do it every year where we sit today. So our plan is to rotate through every well every 3 years. Now that may change as regulatory drivers may drive that, and we may even take a more active approach if we staff up. Couple examples of the field wide is we'll have operators that may be on location that smell gas or even hear gas, but due to not being able to see it or smelling some of it, that's where the OGI camera comes into play. So in your bottom left-hand side there is an example of a leaking valve that an operator had called our safety team to bring down the camera and identified that we had a leak in this valve. So that's just the first piece, detecting the leak, and we'll hear from industry technology today on how to do that. But to be honest, that's the easy piece, identifying the leak. Then it comes down to this whole process of once you identify it, then you have to go fix it. On 1,200 locations, you have to manage that process and ensure that you're fixing those repairs in a timely manner. And the last bullet here, key takeaway, is a root cause analysis. So you need to be able to identify if you have leaking valves, not just replacing that valve, because that valve could leak in 6 months or a year down the road, but truly looking at the data, what it's telling you, what's causing that leak? Do we have something else going on underlying that we're seeing these failures? So on the rapid repair, the last 12 months, we've been averaging about 5 days from time we identify the leak to repair it. And that can range from repairing it on spot to even longer to 30 days where it requires more efforts as far as a lockout, tagout, blowdown, and bringing welders in. The data management piece. So on the bottom right-hand side, this is looking at the last 3 years. I highlighted in on our top 3 offenders of where we're seeing in our field where we're seeing leaks. So in 2018 to 1920, you can see the data is showing as we've been putting a focus on this and invested some capital and manpower and timing, but we're seeing the fruits of our labor to where we're reducing our number of leaks. Interesting thing here on the regulators, we actually see an uptick in 2020. So by having this data in-house and collecting it and doing root cause analysis, we can start diving in and see, well, what's causing that? Is that, and I don't know the answer yet. This is 2020. This is what we're going to be focusing on. I don't know if that's a vintage of regulators. Is it a certain regulator? Or is there some other underlying cause that is driving those increases in leaks in regulator? A couple other examples on the valves. We found a certain manufacturer on our pop-offs or our pressure relief valves that were failing on our scrubber pots. So we identified a bunch of those, and we actually made a process change going forward to where we've gone to a different manufacturer. Another one is on regulators as well. This is back in 2018. We were operating some of those regulators at a higher pressure, which was causing the run life of those regulators to shorten. So by having this robust Eldar program and data management and root cause, we were able to lower our operating pressure on those regulators to mitigate the venting that was happening because we were extending the life that those regulators were actually working before they would fail. So just a couple examples of by doing this in-house and putting a focus on it, you can drive efficiencies into your business. 3 examples. So I talked about workable, scalable, and practical. So taking a business approach at it, we want to reduce emissions, but we want to ensure that we're generating returns by doing that. So a couple of the examples, I'd mentioned the facility design, installation of our low bleed, no bleed pneumatics. So we had about 800 locations that had snap heads that were a high vent, continuous vent operation. What we came up with is those devices were emitting about 2 MCF a day per device. The team looked at the most cost-effective solution to convert those to the no bleed, which was the miser application. Took about 6 months to fully do that, and that's getting the equipment in and going and retroing all those 800 locations at a cost of about $350 per unit. So with the reduction in 2 MCF down to half an MCF, that 1.5 MCF that we were able to save, take that times $2 an MCF, that's an annual savings, about 880 grand that you're putting now to sales versus just going into the atmosphere. Another example is our conversion to our compressed air, as well as the high efficiency boiler. So the key point here is when we looked at some of the data that was driven from our FLIR inspections, our OGI, and our data management, was how do we change our facility design going forward? It wasn't one specific thing, it was a recipe of things. So by going to the compressed air, we were able to reduce our facility classifications. By installing a high efficiency boiler, we were able to reduce our emissions. Unique to Uinta, we have cold weather. We have to have a lot of fire equipment as far as boilers, glycol heating baths, and we burn gas to heat all that. Going and using gas to run all that. Going to compressed air, a lot of the controls, we were able to completely eliminate any emissions inside of our facility. Reducing our footprint that we needed. So quick example, our last 40 wells, 4 pads that we've done this on, the total cost was about 90K, 20K for compressors and all the associated lines, and then about 7,000 for those high efficiency boilers. But we've been able, working with SLR for this emissions calculation, we were able to reduce our emissions by 15.2 tons for those 40 wells in aggregate. The total annualized savings is around $300,000 for the money spent. So it's attractive and reducing emissions. Lastly, another area that we focused is on the drilling completion side. You know, that's one of the higher areas when it comes to the calculations as far as methane emissions. And there's different avenues to look at where you can reduce some of those. The one area we looked at was reducing our emissions by converting our drilling rig to a dual fuel application and using natural gas to supplement diesel. We saw almost $2,000 a day in savings, in fuel savings, and we were able to reduce our NOx and CO2 by 46 and 80 tons respectively. And then that reduced cost by not burning all that diesel equated to about almost $500,000 on those. This was a 16 well pad, so about 225 days worth of drilling. So lastly, 4 key takeaways here. Number 1, a sustainability strategy needs to be centered around culture. You have to have buy-in from the boots on the ground up through the management, all the way to the executive and your sponsors. Otherwise, the program, you're just not going to get traction. You're not going to get buy-in. Second, it's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. You know, we're in the infancy stages at KODA, where Sri had mentioned they've been working on this a lot longer. But you have to start, and you have to establish baselines so you know what you're comparing yourself to, and the money that you're investing, is it working? Lastly, we've proven that we can run an Eldar program managed within our small shop with minimal cost, and there's some added benefits to having that data in-house as far as the root cause analysis that drives process and business decisions going forward. And lastly, numerous projects that are attractive. Now, I'm sure it'll get to a point to where if you're fully reducing 100% emissions, some of these projects may not actually generate returns, but then you got to look at it from the bigger standpoint to what Will had mentioned to his question. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? There's going to be bigger fruits to fry as far as our industry, and showing that we're being prudent operators and key stakeholders and wanting to do the right thing. And that's it. Thanks, Sean.
Great. Thank you, Karl. That's more than just that's it. That's, I wish we had another kind of hour. We're going to have about 8 to 10 minutes of Q&A here, and some is starting to pile in. Rick, do you have the ability to bring both Karl and Sri, and then also invite Elijah Jackson to the screen for Q&A? Okay, well, let me get started given that our time is short. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Some of the types of questions that are coming in are, basically, and I'll start, this with you, Karl. How do I get started? How do I develop the baseline, and how should I think about taking on a program to replace my high bleed pneumatics, right? So those are two questions I've gotten a few times. What would you do in a company's shoes that was literally starting from scratch today on how to develop the baseline and how to take on a valve replacement program?
Sure. The first one is you have to be able to detect it. So whether that's spending the capital to invest in a FLIR camera, or outsourcing that, or using some of the new technology like the scientific aviation and doing the higher level stuff. But that's the first, is you have to be able to go to your sites and detect where the methane emissions is coming from. Second, then you have to be able to track it. So I'd mentioned we built just an Excel sheet that we have our inspectors fill out that shows what type of component, time, date, what it was, collecting all that data to once we start getting enough, we can start doing that data mining to understand, okay, how many of these valves do we have leaking? How often? What's our time response to repair? So those are the two steps you really need to start. Is you need to be able to detect it. So how are you going to do that? Whether that's through FLIR or some of the larger detection capabilities, that technology that's out there. And then second, how are you going to track all of that data that you start collecting? Because then you're going to use that data that you're collecting to drive those business decisions, whether that's replacing those pneumatics, the snap head high bleeds with the low bleeds. I'll actually kick it to Elijah to answer that question as far as how do we identify those 800 locations, and how is that the most cost-effective approach?
Oh, one thing that we all have to remember is on any of our equipment, there's data sheets, and for instance, the snap heads to misers. Basically, you can get on and get the information, and it will show you the fuel gas usage on a snap head type piece of equipment, and you can look it up what the misers use. You don't necessarily have to have FLIR camera to find that, but basically in UINA, we knew all of our equipment had snap heads. We pulled what the usage was, compared it to the misers, seen what we could save in fuel gas, and justified buying the 800K plus dollars worth of equipment to switch it out, and showed how fast we could pay for it. We have that information readily available on any of your equipment. You just have to check back with the manufacturer.
That's great. Yeah, the blocking and tackling kind of at the field level, I think, Karl, your slides are incredibly instructive to people in terms of just how readily available some of that technology and low-hanging fruit is today. Maybe, Sri, if I can pivot to you a little bit. We spoke quite a bit on our prep session about the rate of change and the technology innovation, continuous monitoring, right? VRUs. As we kind of pivot from what, Karl and Elijah are talking about being readily available in the field today, can you talk to the people in the audience about what technology over 1, 2, 3, 4 years you think is going to be available, so that when they get to that point in a year or two, how they can think ahead about many of the technologies that you're experimenting with now and Project Astra and others, to give them a feel for what will be available to them on their journey 1, 2, 3 years out.
Definitely. So there are different technologies, at least we have seen in the last few years. A slew of technologies of different capabilities are available. So I always think about, like, from a top-down approach. So you have aerial, where you can quickly go over your sites or your operational area fairly quickly. Then it also is it's a low cost in my mind, but it's also low frequency, because you can only fly so many times in a year, given the restrictions. And then there is fixed sensors that you can install on your sites. That's a lot more easier. It's high frequency, but also high cost. It also adds to this, you know, it monitors every minute, and then it provides you data. But then you have to decide whether that's something that your facilities need. A well pad that doesn't have a whole lot of methane probably doesn't need that, but then a tank battery with multiple tanks and their multiple trains might be a good candidate for that. And then also there are other technologies that are coming up today. You know, the one interesting thing we always think about and talk about is, you know, satellite technologies that are there that could be, you know, high cost, but very high frequency. A satellite can go over your whole area within a short duration, like within 24 hours or 48 hours, however that's designed to be. So there's a whole slew of technologies that are available. And as far as starting any technology deployment, you always start small, try and see where it fits to your operation, what technology is appropriate to your problem at hand. Like Karl pointed out, you really cannot mitigate anything that you don't measure. So you wanted to have a measurement and a baseline, which you can easily do using an OGI camera. Either you have to purchase these cameras, or you can use contract help to understand how those compare. There's so many technologies in terms of how you can deploy, but then the next generationally speaking, as immediate, if you're in early stages of starting, aerial technology is a very good approach. But then whatever we were thinking as Quake, the satellite technology is coming a lot more faster than you were thinking. So there's the component there. In Astra, what we are trying to do is test different continuous sensors and try and develop a regional monitoring using a mesh network. One of the component of that is also test different sensor technologies that would fit in. So those data will be made available. It's transparent, made available where people can take a look at, see what works, and understand different technologies.
Yep. Yeah, we're well running short on time. We're excited, Sri. You know, I know there's well over a dozen continuous kind of technologies being experimented in Astra, and we do look forward, and we'll share with all of our audience members the results of that when they come out. I am, unfortunately, Karl and Elijah and Sri, we are out of time and starting to steal from the next panel. I do have a host of questions that have come in. So to those who have submitted questions, we will commit to answer. We'll kind of get back on offline via email with some of the panelists and make introductions for those with questions that have gone unanswered. So thank you, gentlemen, Karl, Sri, and Elijah, for making yourself available and all the prep work today. And Andrew, we will turn it back over to you.
Thank you,
John. And thanks to our representatives from industry, Karl and Sri, for the really excellent insights there.